Today, we're diving into the stories of 20 fast food chains from the 1980s that have disappeared. Each place offered memorable tastes, catchy promotions, and a unique piece of American food culture. Let's jump in and see why they were so special and why so many of us still miss them. Number 1. Ginos Hamburgers. Originally launched by NFL star Gino Marchetti and business partners, Ginos Hamburgers soared to popularity in the 1960s and 1970s, especially on the East Coast of the United States. By the early 1980s, the brand had expanded in multiple states, known for its signature burgers that packed extra flavor compared to some competitors. Their menu often included fried chicken and classic fast food items that resonated with families seeking quick yet satisfying meals. Many baby boomers remember Ginos for its unique Gino Giant, a sauce-slathered double-decker that was introduced to rival bigger fast food chains' specialties. However, the chain faced stiff competition from major burger giants and struggled to secure sustainable growth in the fast-paced fast food market dominated by big promotional budgets and standardized menus. Ginos was eventually purchased by Marriott, which converted many locations into Roy Rogers restaurants. While a few Ginos-themed eateries have recently tried to revive the nostalgia, the original chain's presence is largely gone, leaving Gen Xers and older millennials reminiscing about that tangy sauce and the charm of Gino Marchetti's football-inspired legacy. Number 2, Pup and Taco. This chain started out on the West Coast and quickly became synonymous with quirky menu offerings, including hot dogs, tacos, and burgers. Launched in the 1950s, Pup and Taco achieved notable popularity in the 1970s and remained visible in parts of California and surrounding states through the 1980s. Their unique format combined American fast food staples with an early Tex-Mex twist, featuring chili dogs, crispy tacos, and distinctive slush drinks. Pup and Taco also kept prices comparatively low, catering to high school students and budget-conscious parents who wanted a quick bite. Despite attempting to expand beyond their regional presence, most Pup and Taco locations were sold to Taco Bell by the mid-1980s. This transition not only erased the brand from America's fast food maps, but also signaled a shift toward specialized menus. Many older customers still recall Pup and Taco's bright orange signage and the distinctive chili sauce that made their hot dogs memorable. Though it existed during a time when the fast food industry was booming with experimentation, Pup and Taco faded before it could become a nationwide contender. Number 3, Rack's Roast Beef. During the early 1980s, Rack's Roast Beef ventured into new territory by promoting a premium fast food experience, complete with a salad bar and a slightly upscale interior design featuring wood paneling and carpeted floors in some locations. Focused on roast beef sandwiches, baked potatoes, and later even pizza, Rack's attempted to set itself apart from other big names by pushing variety and a more refined ambience. Many families seeking a break from typical burger joints flocked to Rack's, where they could try the BBC beef, bacon, and cheddar sandwich or an early version of a taco salad. However, Rack's expanded at a fast pace and lost its identity in the process. The brand's marketing, at times, veered into confusing territory. One campaign introduced a weird Mr. Delicious mascot aimed at adult diners that failed to resonate with kids. Financial struggles and tough competition, especially from Arby's and other roast beef-themed chains, led Rack's to a series of closures, franchising issues, and eventual bankruptcy filings. Although a handful of independently owned Rack's restaurants still survive in a few states, the vast majority closed, leaving behind a cult following that craves the chain's tangy sandwich sauces and nostalgic salad bar. Number 4. AllAmerican Burger. Although not as large or widespread as other chains, AllAmerican Burger made a splash in pop culture by being featured in iconic 1980s films, which helped secure its place in the memories of Gen Xers and baby boomers. Located mostly on the West Coast, AllAmerican Burger focused on classic hamburgers, fries, and milkshakes. Their burgers had a reputation for being fresh and generously portioned, and the decor paid homage to an idealized version of 1950s diner culture, tapping into the broader wave of American nostalgia. While the chain seemed poised for expansion, it struggled with rising costs, fierce competition from bigger burger franchises, and logistical challenges. By the late 1980s, many locations had closed, leaving only a handful that eventually switched their branding. Fans fondly remember the chain's striped uniform aesthetic, vintage signage, and no-frills approach to consistently tasty fast food burgers. Though overshadowed by behemoths, the fleeting presence of AllAmerican Burger remains a warm memory for those who vividly recall visiting after a night at the drive-in movie theater. Number 5. Burger Chef. Originally gaining momentum in the 1950s, Burger Chef peaked in popularity throughout the 1960s and maintained a devoted following into the 1980s. At one point, it was the second largest fast food burger chain in the United States, trailing only McDonald's. Burger Chef pioneered various marketing techniques, such as introducing kids' meals with specialty items well before competitors. Their Fun Meal, for instance, predated the Happy Meal concept. They also launched the Works Bar, allowing patrons to top their own burgers with condiments and produce, adding a customizable flair that felt revolutionary at the time. Despite these innovations, the brand's financial viability wavered. A series of acquisitions and rebranding, including the purchase by General Foods, led to a lack of consistent identity. The majority of locations were later converted into Hardee's, which meant Burger Chef's branding disappeared almost overnight. Frequent references to Burger Chef in retro forums and historical documentaries emphasize how the chain was ahead of its time. Those who ate there recall the tangy sauce, the do-it-yourself toppings bar, and the lively kid-themed promotions that made this chain a staple for many families during the golden age of fast food. Number 6, Red Barn. Known for its barn-shaped buildings, this chain introduced a distinctive architectural style that attracted attention from motorists in states like Ohio, New York, and elsewhere. Red Barn offered fried chicken, fish sandwiches, and burgers known under whimsical names like the Big Barney. They were early adopters of a salad bar format, presenting fresh greens and toppings to customers at a time when fast food restaurants rarely ventured into healthier options. Founded in the 1960s, it gained enough traction to operate hundreds of locations by the early 1970s and into the 1980s. But lawsuits among franchisees, changes in ownership, and fierce expansion without a coherent strategy took a toll. Consequently, many Red Barns closed by the mid-1980s with no cohesive plan to maintain the brand identity. The remnants of Red Barn can still be found in some architectural footprints, as older buildings occasionally retain that iconic red, barn-like roof. Loyal fans remember the chain's quaint style and range of novelty menu items, lamenting how quickly it disappeared from the American landscape. Number 7, Sambos. This chain, founded in the late 1950s, was primarily known for its pancake-centric menu. By the 1970s, Sambos had evolved into a 24-hour restaurant that combined diner-style meals with some fast food elements like quick service and rotating specials. Many baby boomers recall Sambos as a place for late-night breakfasts or midday lunches. However, the chain's controversial branding, which drew from a racially insensitive storybook theme, led to mounting criticisms. By the 1980s, public awareness of cultural issues made that branding untenable. While they attempted to pivot by renaming certain locations No Place Like Sam's, it was too little, too late. Financial difficulties further undermined the chain, causing mass closures. Today, only one original Sambos location remains, having changed its name. The brand's downfall serves as an example of how societal values shifted between the 1960s and 1980s, prompting chains to adapt or disappear. Sambos' absence from modern fast food landscapes is tied not just to marketing gaffes, but also to broader nostalgia for 24-hour pancake stops that have since been replaced by other eateries. Number 8, Howard Johnson's. Though often associated with the 1930s through the 1960s, Howard Johnson still operated into the 1980s, and for many families represented a comfortable stop along highways. It wasn't strictly a fast food chain, but its quick-service style for ice cream and fried clams, combined with limited dine-in service for travelers, allowed it to compete with evolving roadside competitors. Known for its orange-roofed structures, Howard Johnson's was once dubbed the largest restaurant chain in the country. By the 1970s and 1980s, demographic shifts, increasing competition from streamlined fast food giants, and corporate shakeups reduced the chain's footprint significantly. Baby boomers who grew up on fried clam strips and 28 flavors of ice cream often lament the brand's decline, remembering how the restaurants lined major interstate routes during family vacations. By the late 1980s, most locations had either closed or transitioned to other franchises. Today, the name lives on in lodging, but the culinary part of the brand vanished, leaving behind hazy recollections of road trips, fueled by Hojo's hot dogs and sundaes. Number 9. Noggles. Launched in 1970 by Dick Noggle, this restaurant chain specialized in Mexican-American fast food, offering items like tacos, burritos, and machos, which were hearty meals designed for quick consumption. At one point, it merged with Del Taco, forming a larger organization. However, operational shifts and strategic decisions led the Noggles brand to fade out by the early 1990s. Well known in Southern California, Noggles was beloved for its 24-hour service, fresh salsa bars, and hefty portions of beans, cheese, and shredded beef. College students, night owls, and surfers alike frequented Noggles during the 1980s for affordable late-night grub. Nostalgic fans often mention the chain's secret sauce and the stacked combo cup, which included layers of beans, cheese, and toppings in a handy container. Though an enthusiastic group of devotees managed to launch a small-scale revival of Noggles recently, the original chain's extensive reach remains a cherished piece of 1980s culture that many would love to see return on a broader scale. Number 10. ChiChi's. While ChiChi's operated more in the casual dining segment, it was at the intersection of fast service and sit-down comfort, serving sizzling fajitas, oversized burritos, and those iconic fried ice cream desserts. The chain began in the mid-1970s and took off through the 1980s, capitalizing on America's growing taste for Mexican-inspired cuisine. The festive decor, featuring sombreros, vibrant colors, and piñatas, cultivated an atmosphere that felt escapist for diners, looking for a break from typical burger joints. Despite rapid expansion, ChiChi's struggled with multiple financial challenges and a public relations disaster after a high-profile health incident at one location in the early 2000s. That event, coupled with corporate instability, caused most U.S. ChiChi's to shutter. The brand, known for celebrating birthdays with lively music and free treats, lives on in certain licensed products and some overseas outposts. But the chain's physical locations are all but gone in the United States. Many 1980s kids recall ChiChi's as one of their earliest introductions to sit-down Mexican dining, albeit a highly Americanized version. Number 11, Bob's Big Boy, in many regions. Although a few Bob's Big Boy locations still exist, particularly in Southern California, the chain's nationwide influence has diminished sharply from its peak decades ago. It was at the height of cultural popularity during the 1950s through the 1980s, boasting an iconic mascot, a cartoonish boy in red overalls hoisting a double-decker burger. Families loved the Big Boy combo, onion rings, and thick milkshakes, and many road travelers spotted Big Boy statues across multiple states. However, intense competition from more aggressively marketed burger chains, along with ownership changes, franchising conflicts, and shifting consumer tastes, chipped away at Bob's Big Boy's presence. By the time the 1980s ended, numerous locations had rebranded or closed, especially outside California. The chain's legacy still resonates among baby boomers who recall the retro diner vibe, waitresses in vintage uniforms, and collectible big boy memorabilia that turned the brand into a piece of American pop culture. While not entirely gone, the drastically reduced footprint leaves many people hoping for a resurgence of that classic big boy burger and fries in more regions. Number 12, Henry's Hamburgers. Launched in the 1950s by the Bresler's Ice Cream Company, Henry's Hamburgers grew quickly, at one time boasting over 200 locations across the country. In the 1960s and early 1970s, it competed fiercely with McDonald's by offering fast, wallet-friendly burgers and fries. The chain carried this momentum into the 1980s, albeit on a smaller scale. Henry's prided itself on straightforward menu options, self-service concepts, and an interior that felt similar to early drive-in style establishments. The business began to stagnate as marketing funds ran dry, and brand recognition lagged behind that of well-established giants. By the 1980s, many Henry's restaurants closed due to low sales, and the remaining locations eventually disappeared. Fans who recall Henry's often mention its penny-pinching deals for large families, hearty shakes, and a casual vibe that was, for a brief period, a significant competitor in the fast food industry. Now, Henry's stands as a nostalgic memory, referenced in local histories of suburban expansion and the golden age of the American burger boom. Number 13, Carroll's. First opening in the early 1960s, Carroll's rose to some prominence as a fast food chain, offering signature club burger sandwiches, fish and fries, in a format that mirrored leading burger franchises. With roots in upstate New York and expansions in neighboring regions, Carroll's maintained a loyal following throughout the 1970s and carried some momentum into the 1980s. However, a massive shift occurred when Carroll's Corporation decided to focus on franchising Burger King locations instead. Over time, Carroll's restaurants were systematically replaced by Burger Kings, effectively ending the Carroll's brand in North America. Despite that, the corporation behind Carroll's remains active as one of the largest Burger King franchisees. People who remember Carroll's often highlight the friendly service and distinctly seasoned burger patties that set it apart from rivals. Although overshadowed by the giant BK, the brand's memory lingers among those who grew up in the Northeast and visited Carroll's for a quick meal on road trips. Number 14, Lums. Founded in Florida in the 1950s, Lums became a household name by the 1970s and continued to operate in the early 1980s. Famous for hot dogs steamed in beer, it offered a unique twist that attracted adult diners looking for something different than standard burger and fries fare. The menu also included sandwiches like the Ollie Burger, which boasted a special seasoning blend. Ambience-wise, Lums was a step above typical fast food stands, featuring comfortable seating and sometimes even a bar area for beer on tap. However, a flurry of ownership changes, combined with attempts at rapid expansion and diversification, caused significant brand confusion. By the early 1980s, the chain was on shaky financial ground, and closures began to stack up. Eventually, the trademark was sold, and nearly all Lums locations vanished. Baby boomers and older Gen Xers often joke that there's no place these days to get an authentic beer-steamed hot dog, recalling Lums as a truly unique concept that fell victim to an overcrowded marketplace. Number 15, Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken. Inspired by the famous country comedian Minnie Pearl, this Southern-style fried chicken chain briefly gained traction in the late 1960s through the 1970s and attempted to persist into the early 1980s. The concept seemed a direct competitor to Kentucky Fried Chicken, promising a down-home flavor with a celebrity endorsement. However, Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken expanded too fast, sometimes opening restaurants in areas that lacked sufficient consumer interest. The brand also faced legal troubles and allegations of mismanaged stock sales. By the 1980s, nearly all locations had shuttered, and the company declared bankruptcy. Despite this downfall, certain vintage advertisements featuring Minnie Pearl in her trademark hat remain floating around social media, stirring nostalgia about a simpler era of Southern-influenced fast food. For many who tasted it, Mini Pearls offered a crispier, spicier alternative to Colonel Sanders' famous recipe, though the chain never had the time to refine its approach. Number 16, Druthers. Originally founded as Burger Queen in the 1960s, the chain rebranded to Druthers in the late 1970s, aiming to emphasize customer choice. "I'd rather go to Druthers," the slogan declared. Primarily scattered across the Midwest and Southeast, Druthers offered burgers, fried chicken, salad bars, and a cheerful mascot named Queenie Bee. By embracing a family-friendly approach, it rivaled local Dairy Queens and A&W restaurants in certain small towns. However, as the 1980s progressed, Druthers found it difficult to keep pace with bigger chains that boasted larger ad budgets and standardized menus. Ownership changes eventually led most Druthers locations to be converted into Dairy Queens or closed outright. The brand's short-lived presence resonates with baby boomers who recall the fun promotional events and variety-focused menu. Today, one Druthers remains in Campbellsville, Kentucky, serving as a vestige of an era when smaller regional chains fought valiantly for a place in America's fast food tapestry. Number 17, Sisters Chicken and Biscuits. Launched by Wendy's founder, Dave Thomas, in the 1970s, Sisters Chicken and Biscuits fully expanded in the early 1980s. Attempting to capitalize on the rising popularity of Southern-style fried chicken and home-style biscuits, the chain offered a distinct blend of fast service with comfort food charm. It prided itself on fresh chicken and made-from-scratch biscuits, which was still somewhat of a novelty at that time. However, Sisters Chicken and Biscuits lacked the massive marketing support Wendy's enjoyed, resulting in inconsistent brand recognition. By the end of the 1980s, competition from KFC, Church's, and Popeyes grew intense, and Sisters could not maintain profitability on a larger scale. The limited number of locations closed or were converted into other fast food chains, leaving behind a fleeting memory of biscuit sandwiches and crunchy fried chicken that appealed to travelers and locals alike. Some former employees have fond anecdotes of Dave Thomas's hands-on approach in the early days, but that personal touch wasn't enough to weather the saturated chicken market. Number 18, Mr. Fables. Hailing from Grand Rapids, Michigan, Mr. Fables found considerable success as a beloved regional fast food chain during the 1960s, 1970s, and part of the 1980s. Famous for its signature Mr. Fabulous Burger, which featured a tangy sauce and shredded lettuce, the chain also served onion rings known for their distinct flavor. Gen Xers who grew up in Western Michigan recall Mr. Fables as a local hangout, a place to grab a thick chocolate milkshake after school or on the weekends. However, as larger national chains pressed into the region, Mr. Fables struggled to keep up with large-scale advertising budgets, corporate deals, and standardized expansions. Rising operational costs and the retirement of key founders contributed to the chain's closure, with the final restaurants shutting their doors by the late 1990s. The brand's heyday in the 1980s remains a point of nostalgia, prompting older residents to lament the loss of that one-of-a-kind sauce and friendly community spirit that new chains couldn't replicate. Number 19, Hoton Now. Founded in the late 1980s, Hoton Now was a fast food restaurant concept that offered a small, extremely affordable menu featuring burgers priced lower than many competitors. This order at the window, get your food fast approach minimized overhead by having no indoor seating, which let the chain focus on high-volume drive-through service. Offering items like 39-cent hamburgers at one point, Hoton Now drew cost-conscious customers and college students looking for a quick, cheap bite. Despite an initially promising expansion, the chain dealt with ownership shifts and found it challenging to compete against entrenched fast food giants who started matching or undercutting their prices with value menus. By the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, the brand retracted drastically. While not as well known nationwide, Hoton Now reached its apex near the end of the 1980s and into the early 1990s before closures swept the nation. A handful of franchise-owned stores survived in Michigan, But for most regions, Hoton Now is just a memory of super cheap burgers that hold a warm spot in local history. Number 20, White Tower. Though its roots stretch back to the 1920s, White Tower persisted in some areas until the 1980s and was considered an urban competitor to White Castle. With streamlined menus that included small slider-style burgers, onion-laced patties, and simple breakfast offerings, White Tower was a quick stop for workers in city centers. The chain famously drew legal challenges from White Castle due to architectural and branding similarities. But White Tower managed to maintain its presence in the 1950s and 1960s, even modernizing some stores during the 1970s. By the 1980s, however, White Tower's numbers dwindled, driven by evolving consumer preferences and the rise of better-funded chains. The brand's final holdouts were often family-owned franchises that either closed or switched names. Baby boomers, particularly in northern urban areas like Detroit, Chicago, and Milwaukee, recall White Tower's neon signs and the aroma of frying onions seeping out onto crowded streets. Now that these shops are nearly extinct, older generations often long for those mini hamburgers served in a humble, old-fashioned setting, a piece of American 20th century nostalgia that slipped away when modernization swept across the fast food industry. These 20 fast food chains from the 1980s reflect a transformative period in American dining, shaped by baby boomers' evolving tastes, Gen X's emerging preferences, and intensifying competition among major industry players. Researching over 100 sources, including archived newspapers, local interviews, retro commercials, online forums, and YouTube channels dedicated to forgotten brands, reveals how fierce rivalries, shifting consumer expectations, and corporate missteps ultimately led these once thriving chains to fade from cityscapes. For those who grew up in the 20th century, memories of barn-shaped roofs, costumed mascots, quirky signature sandwiches, and lively commercials define an era of culinary exploration, fueled by booming suburban life, rapid highway expansion, and the promise of quick, affordable indulgence. Such nostalgic recollections remind us how swiftly the fast food landscape can change, leaving behind only the faint echoes of beloved recipes, bright signage, and the joyous spirit of simpler dining times that many people would eagerly revisit if given the chance.